2 weeks ago, I talked about the notion of the sacred self and our need to accept both the joys and the responsibilities of being worthy in and of ourselves. We are unique, precious, and extraordinary. We are capable. This is the job of holding self as sacred, to figure out what it is we're most capable at and to make sure we use those powers for the good. This all came up for me this week as I was thinking about Yom Kippur and about those books and we're all reading. It's all hard stuff. Hard because the bottom line with what we're hearing requires both an understanding of our complicity and a response to a clarion call for action. Complicity. Both Tim Wise and Ta-Nehisi Coates make fairly strong cases for the need for us to break down white supremacy and systematized racism. It is difficult, while reading their books, to look away from the privilege most of us enjoy as mostly, not completely, white Americans. And if we stand for justice, then we have to see that, however uncomfortable it makes us. Otherwise, we're simply embracing willful ignorance. I heard Coates use that term in an interview I listened to the other day. I'd already been thinking about one of my favorite seminary prof's sermons, one that was so powerful I remember it still, almost 30 years later. He took as text the story of Joseph and the work he did in Egypt in the face of famine. He was an excellent steward. The book of Genesis ends with that story, with the building of warehouses and the storing of grain and the husbandry of fields. In the first chapter of Exodus, which is the next book, if you're not familiar with that book, the 8th verse proclaims, "And there came to power a new king who knew not Joseph." James Washington talked about the immense power of Joseph's reign as steward in the land of his captivity. He planted well, oversaw storehouses so that there would be food in times of famine. He made a huge difference. For Joseph to have been forgotten, willful amnesia would have been required. We may use some of that today. The other day, I don't know how many of you saw this, but there was a story posted of a 107-year-old woman who returned after 100 years, 1,000 years, she was very old, right, 100 years to a town in Mississippi from which her family had fled the night before her father was to be lynched. A man who was to have been lynched with him went back because he missed his white girlfriend. He was shot, kept alive to be hung, and then burned. There is a photo showing the over 10,000 people who came to see him lynched. I'm sure somewhere Madame Lafarge was knitting. This is our history, which we forget. And why wouldn't we want to? And we can say it happened there, but all sorts of stuff happens here, happened in our families, happens still, but remains deeply uncomfortable to look at. So what do we do with that history? What we do with the fact that systematized racism has consistently prohibited people of color from progressing as freely as the rest of America does, whether that's through education, it's through buying of houses. There's some nasty stuff that has just recently surfaced about the fact that many of the outsider laws that kept people of color out of houses, particularly during the 50s, right after the war, when housing equity happened for so many American families, but that is still happening today. And you all want to go, oh, in the South. No, everywhere, everywhere. And there's a story I've heard, and I believe it's happened since I came here, but it's one of those hearsay. But there's a prof who left Bucknell when he could not get a mortgage, So, at this point, I admit I didn't call G and find out the truth about that. But I believe that we have to acknowledge this, along with our willingness not look too closely at the way those things continue today. What keeps us from admitting our privilege and profit? I've been wondering if, at least in part, it doesn't stem from a discomfort in processing the awareness of our privilege. In many traditions, the confession of sin and the assurance of pardon are a regular part of the liturgy. On Yom Kippur, liturgies such as the one we read are read 8 times during the day's services. I'm an old Presbyterian. I immediately thought of the confession of faith and assurance of pardon. I actually used to love that part of the service. I had the 3 we usually used memorized, and we prayed all of the time for the things which we have done, which we ought not to have done, and the things which we left undone, which we ought to have done. But where you use, who is going to assure us of our pardon? Some of us may have an answer to that question. Many of us will not. So if someone, big S, can't forgive our sins, or doesn't, we must be secure enough to recognize that we are only human, that we have done less than our best, that we can be forgiven our humanity, even by ourselves, and then called into new ways of being in the world. I think this requires a strong sense of self, an awareness of our sacred, albeit fallible self. We must be strong enough to admit that we fall short, and then strong enough to forgive ourselves, and then strong enough to begin again. And actually, I just read Brene Brown's last book, or I think it was her last book, called Rising. And I don't know whether you guys know her. She's sort of a New Age women's speaker. She's somewhat different than many of them because she's a sociologist, and much of her work is based in research. But she speaks all over, and I have a couple girlfriends who just adore her. And in fact, I like her stuff, but I've always been like, what is it? Like, why don't I go further with this? What don't I like? And sometimes I think, I know some of this stuff. I could do some of that. Why don't I go further with that? And it is in the long run that I believe that the best work we do around these particular issues, we do in community. And that not only do we need to be able to have a sense of ourself that is strong enough to say, ooh, I'm not really happy about that. But we're sitting in a congregation with other people go like, oh yeah, I've done some of that stuff too. And well, okay, we'll do better. And then for the community to start again. I believe so strongly in this. If we can begin to forgive ourselves, perhaps we can forgive others. I believe that when we are unwilling to forgive others, we are perhaps holding on to the notion that we are above sin, because we can't imagine how to accept our fallibility. In this scenario, only others can be fallible. It becomes easy to insist on individual responsibility rather than to begin to examine and then systematically dismantle all that keeps racism in place, or any other ism we want to talk about, including our determination to not see the role we play or what happened earlier that was not our fault, but from which we continue to profit. Can we let go of willful ignorance? What will it cost us? What will we gain? What will others gain if we begin to see the truth? If we accept ourselves as sacred, then we must hold ourselves accountable for our wrongdoings. Only then is there a chance to move on, a chance to take a new path. We say what we have done wrong. We forgive ourselves and one another, and we begin again in love. Beginning again in love may well be the most lovely definition I have ever heard for activism, because that's what we're talking about here. When I went to the Undoing Racism workshop, they were very clear from the get that what was needed to overturn racism was not for white people to become allies. The struggle against white supremacy and institutionalized racism does not belong to people of color. It is our struggle. If we believe our first, fifth, and sixth principles, then this struggle is ours. And so you don't have to look in the back. It's worth, voice, and freedom. I was really happy I didn't have to look that up. I'm learning them. But actually, this is sort of bad news. As probably everyone does who goes to seminary, we're all very happy to think of ourselves as prophets. I'm a prophet. We dream of dreaming great dreams and inspiring the world to go about doing good. It's a much nicer picture than activism, and it's less challenging to your manicure. Not that I have one, but it is in the doing of the work that change happens. I laughed yesterday when I realized I could lean back into things and say for my sermon, hey, the Pope, what he says. How often does a UU minister get to say that? But really, the Pope, this Pope, yeah, there's some things wrong, but the Pope. Interestingly, in our church, the yard sale has taken on a role of activism. It was started as a fundraiser. We quickly realized that two other important things were happening while people were frantically searching for treasures. Some people got things they needed for prices they could afford. And that's certainly meaningful. And our community is building incredible bonds within and without during that time. But this year I saw more clearly than ever that there's a quiet activism that eases the hearts and the pain of separation from families who have had a loved one die or have needed to downsize. When you're packing boxes in a family's living room, dismantling a life, and the gentleman who is being supported stands by, touching precious memories, telling their stories, and being grateful for the support on a job he cannot undertake on his own. That is life-changing, and that is activism on the behalf of the needy. Part of activism, I believe, is making visible what is not seen by everyone. Anyone who worked in that house understood by the end what we were doing. Everyone listened to stories. I spoke once about my Undoing Racism's workshop leader, Maurice's vulnerability to the police because of his size and color. There's an awful irony of a man who looks so powerful, to be so disempowered, to have such a fragile life. Coates' book talks powerfully about the pain of being in a black male body that is constantly at risk. Sitting in that Undoing Racism circle, hearing over and over again from very accomplished professionals doing wonderful work, that they didn't feel strong or powerful or even competent, I was aghast at my own ignorance. All this incredible power that was bottled up because our world will not recognize it. We all know the statistics. It is on us to make space for those people caught in the statistics of institutionalized racism, because we are the lesser for that loss. And really, how much work does it take for me to remain ignorant? I have friends of color. I went to schools with them. They are exceptional people. But no one is exceptional enough to break down that barrier in all ways. We have work to do. Because I really do weigh in toward the visionary end of the scale, it's important to me to work as part of a team. Together, we can do far more than we can on our own. We see this with our Social Concerns Committee, who keep bringing us opportunities not only to give money, but also to invest our time and also to be educated. We don't have enough time. We're busy, we say, and that's true. Goodness knows I know how to be busy. But we're better people, better families when we're working to make things better. We're a better community when we're working together and reporting back on what we're doing and what we're learning. If we want to grow kind, generous, and caring adults from our wonderful children, we need to lead by example and presence. We need to demand presence of ourselves and others. This will make a lifelong difference in our children and in the world they inhabit. Let's teach them to put gentle hands on the world and to turn it around. Sometimes I think we expect too little of ourselves. We allow ourselves to become distracted by what's in front of us and miss what's going on around us. The choice for activism is not an easy one, but our distaste for the choice can't be allowed to hide the deep need. We will probably not change the whole world, but we are making a difference, even a bit, in changing the valley. And it's work, but it's not undoable. It's amazing right now. Programs that were reliant on what we managed to gather are doing very well, thank you very much, without us. We are offering them money and they're saying, yeah, go help some others get started. Wow, okay. And in a totally startling way, people are signing up from outside and saying, can we help? And we're like, yeah, wait, we'll be right with you. Let's figure this out. Oh my God, work on the website, do these things. But Scott always says that it's a good day when we put our charity work out of business. It seemed cute and naive as a slogan. But the Church of the Brethren minister and I found ourselves whispering over Facebook, what if we really were to become the valley with no hungry children? What if? Until we start seeing jobs come into this valley, our work is to keep finding hungry kids and feeding them. It's to get a program to supply needy women with hygiene products. It's to raise money and gifts for the women's shelter and for mostly mutts and for everything else we give to. It's also, and this is why we're reading these books, to start thinking and asking ourselves questions about race and inequality. And, as we're going to discuss after these services, it's to think about what kind of church we want to be and where and how we want to live. We're all going to have to be involved with that. What we offer ourselves, what we provide to the world, all these things are very interesting. The more ways we can find to begin again in love, the happier we'll be as individuals, the more connected we'll be as families, and the stronger we'll be as a community. And that will keep us working to make the valley better. And there's the call to action. Having gained clarity and asked forgiveness, to begin again in love. I believe we can do this. I actually believe we do it. And I believe that it is the right thing to do. Blessed be.